Preparing live stream. We are live streaming. Okay, we'll start just in a couple of minutes. A few more people to log in, and there's also a raft of UK students as well watching today. So we've got our UK student program, and those people in higher education, colleges, universities that want to get a career in the games industry. So we've sent it to them as well. We normally get quite a few viewers from that, so a bit of mixed UK and Russian audience. I will do a short 2-minute intro without stealing your thunder and saying too much, and then I'll come to you with some questions. And at any point, you can tell me I've asked you the wrong question and answer whatever questions you want.
Excellent. Just make up my own question.
That's fine, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Questions will be asked from the audience in the Q&A section, so I'll just add them in as we go.
Okay.
I'm just going to respond to someone that's asked just that question. And we've got someone, if they put questions in Russian, they'll be translated for English.
you're not doing that.
No, thankfully I'm not, no. So if you're not in Guildford, where are you?
Sort of down the A3, basically. So we had an office in Petersfield.
Okay.
But obviously at the moment we're all working from home.
Yeah.
So I'm just the other side of Hindhead.
Hindhead. Oh gosh. Yeah. Nice part of the country, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Especially now there's a tunnel, so you don't have to make your way through a single lane.
Right, so we are recording. We are on YouTube. I'm going to make a start, Fiona.
Great.
I'm just going to change the view. Okay, wonderful. So thank you all very much for joining me here today in the latest installment in the Play UK Russia programme, an innovative programme to create connections between the UK and Russian games industry professionals. The programme's delivered by the Cultural and Education section of the British Embassy in Moscow, the Universal University and Scream School in Moscow, and UKI, the games trade body. And I'm your host this evening, Sam from UKI. Now, the United Kingdom is a powerhouse in games development and publishing, from the early days of bedroom coders through to the multinational studios of today. The UK has been at the forefront of games development and games commerce for over 40 years. But at the heart of the games industry, whether you're in the UK or Russia or anywhere in the world, are the incredible people that lead and inspire the sector. And in this series of events, you will hear from 5 industry leaders from the UK games industry. They'll share some stories, their passions, their successes, maybe the failures. In some cases, they're legends of the industry, but each and every one of them are still at the top of their game, creating amazing, enthralling experiences for the players of today. This week, I'm delighted to be interviewing Fiona Sperry. Fiona is the co-founder and CEO of Three Fields Entertainment, a small independent game development studio based here in the UK. Fiona is a hugely experienced leader of games teams with over 25 years at the top level. Whilst at Criterion, Fiona was central to the release of the Burnout and their Need for Speed franchises. And today, Three Fields Entertainment focus on an intriguing blend of technology, big data, genetic algorithms, machine learning and procedural generation to accelerate the development process. Hopefully we'll get into that with you shortly, Fiona, to find out more. And Three Fields Entertainment have used such skills to launch 5 games in 5 years from a standing start, which is all impressive. Thank you very much for joining us here today, Fiona.
Oh, it's a pleasure to join you. really excited.
Just very quickly for our audience before we get into the interview, we'd love this to be an interactive experience. So if anyone would like to ask any questions, please click on the Q&A section at the bottom and ask the questions, and I will deal with them. And also, the interpretation button on the bottom right-hand corner will allow you to listen to the Russian language channel if you prefer. So, Fiona, shall we start at the start? So how on earth did you get into the games industry?
So I did a history degree at University College London, and I left and sort of basically went almost straight into book publishing. So I worked for McGraw-Hill, which is a big educational book publishing, who are based in New York, but at the time they had a large presence in the UK. And so I started as an editorial assistant, and I worked my way up through that for about 5 years. And I ended up doing, it was the days where there was a CD-ROM on the front of every magazine, and they were doing CD-ROM publishing. And I ended up basically running the CD-ROM multimedia publishing side, which was quite a sort of eclectic mix of different products. And actually is part of the reason how I ended up in games, because I actually ended up going to Acclaim Entertainment. My boss at McGraw-Hill, my ultimate boss, and not my boss, but the head of the company in the UK, his father-in-law was a guy called Rodney Cousins, who ran himself a bit of a stalwart of the industry, and he ran Acclaim Entertainment. And so this guy, Fred, said, go and pitch one of your CD, because we were making much more sort of mass market type products than McGraw-Hill generally was releasing at that time. So he said, oh, go and pitch this. We made this CD-ROM called Weird, which was all about sort of weird and fantastical sort of events, basically. And anyway, went and pitched it to Acclaim in Knightsbridge. Anyway, they didn't take the product, they didn't distribute it for us, but actually Alex was sitting in the audience that day, and Alex Ward is my long-time creative partner, and that's actually how I met him, although I didn't actually join games industries for several years after that. So yeah, so that's how I started, and that was my first job. But I left that basically they were moving a lot of back to New York, and to be honest, educational book publishing is pretty I found it pretty dull. If you do really, really well, you might like sell 2,000 copies of something, and it just felt like there was not much impact to be had. If I didn't go to work in the morning, would it really matter? So I left there. I took voluntary redundancy and left with no idea what I was going to go and do. But multimedia had led me essentially to project management. And actually, as most publishing people in editorial, what you're doing is managing a list of authors, and so actually you have pretty good project management skills. And that was really the reason I'd got into. I remember my stepmother had said to me, "Oh, you're really good at being organized. Why don't you do something like that?" So that's how I sort of then got into games, because essentially I had good project management skills, and I went to some agencies, and I didn't want to go into advertising, so games just seemed really fascinating, and I thought, this could be really interesting. And actually Criterion was the first place I interviewed.
Oh really? That's amazing.
Yes,
that was the first place.
Yeah.
So you've never failed at interview stage, Fiona. We might ask you questions about
I
why
don't know.
you're so
They gave
good
me
at
a really
interviews.
tough time. I remember David Lauke, who ran Criterion, they were primarily a technology company, and they were very worried because at that point I didn't know a huge amount about games, and they were like, well, a bit worried about that. And I was like, well, I guess, I'm good at what I do, and which is organize things and people. And that's actually what they desperately needed at the time. They didn't really have any producers. They didn't have any producers, I don't think. Maybe one, maybe Jamie McDonald. So yeah, so they didn't have that. And so I was looking for a job. They didn't have the skills I had. So that's kind of how I ended up there.
Well, sounds a bit serendipitous. That's a lovely timing, isn't it? And David Lauke, Rod Cousins, these are real I was about to say blasts from the past, but they're not. They're still around.
Yeah, they're very much
still
so.
Absolutely doing amazing things. So so thinking about not necessarily those individuals, but when you got into the games industry then from this publishing background, what was it like?
It's funny actually, because this was 1997, so PlayStation had sort of come onto the scene, and it had really it was a time where you really needed to be working in a publisher. The development kits were incredibly expensive. You couldn't just, the days of being sort of a small team, that they were not those days. They were sort of very much like you needed to be working with a publisher. You needed money. You needed, team sizes were starting to increase, and at the same time, a lot of the teams just didn't have the, like, literally I went into Criterion and they just didn't have any producers. They didn't have anybody sort of running the team. They were just like a bunch of guys making a game. And so I suppose it was sort of the start of it starting to get, the very start of it starting to get organized. I mean, it took a long time to go from there to the days we have now, where you've got, these massive teams, hundreds and hundreds of people that, some of the publishers have appeared to do a good job of managing over the years, although obviously recent events suggest perhaps not such a decent job. But I was always in awe of these people who could run a team of 500 people around the world. I'd be like, my God, that's just, really a tough thing to do well, and to not, to do it in a way that keeps the game quality high, but also to keep people happy. And I think we're starting to see now that, maybe that balance is incredibly hard to do.
It is, yeah. I think that's something else we'll park for later.
We will probably come back to that.
I'm interested in so you started as a producer. For our audience, what does a producer do? What are they responsible for?
So great question. So a producer, in my mind, is, and it varies, I hasten to add, by company. So for me, a producer really is the person who they don't necessarily say this is what we're going to do, but they establish where we're going, what's the vision. That can come from a creative director. It can sometimes come from a producer. You do get producers who are very, very creative. When I started out, I was very much a project manager. So I would help the team make sure they understood what their vision was, and then worked out. I remember sitting down with the very first, because when I first joined Criterion, actually, I was working with some teams in Russia, actually.
Right.
Criterion were working with some external teams in Petersburg, and I used to go out there and help this team. But then I very quickly ended up working with the internal teams. And so I would sit down with them and say, right, what are we making? Right, what are the steps? How do we essentially schedule that out? In some companies, that's called a development manager. I always prefer to keep it sort of together. I don't think you can do it without any creative input. I think you have to have, there's a creative side and an organizational side. I think it's very hard to split it entirely, but certainly starting out, you perhaps don't know. I certainly didn't know what the game should be. I mean, I've learned a lot in the 27 years or whatever it is since, but it's basically organization. It's helping the team to achieve their goals, and in particular, helping a team work out how to do what they want to do when they find out the thing that they wanted to do isn't possible, because that happens a lot. Basically, when you're making games, often what you're doing has a huge degree of technical uncertainty and creative uncertainty, because ultimately it's about whether it'll be fun. And so what you think might be fun might not be fun when you do it. And then you have to work out what to do, which is, I suppose, I call punting, which is basically trying to figure out how to get out of the situation you're in and get into a better situation.
That's interesting that you reference the sort of organizational skills, but also with that creativity that you can throw at a project. And you say that the studio didn't have that. It seems like such a fundamental role in a company. Is it not one of the first on the order sheet when they're looking at building a team?
It's funny, actually. I mean, in Criterion's case, don't forget they were a technology company. So Criterion back in the day had invented this 3D technology which became known as renderware. And so they were very much coming at games from a point of view of being a great showcase for their technology. And so the first few games they made were kind of really technical demonstrations, right, and largely on the PC. They did quite a lot of work with Intel back in the day. I've been to Moscow actually with Intel to demonstrate some of those games. Again, a long time ago, I think about 1999. And so often the way games teams are formed is quite fascinating, because game teams tend to form around an individual often, maybe not now, but certainly back then, is that I remember the very first internal game I made, the first sort of game I released, was a game called Trick Style, which was a launch title for the Dreamcast, and actually was the first game we signed with Acclaim. going back to Rod Cousins again. And that was based around, I think the studio had asked for games to be pitched, and one of the artists had pitched this game, which was a sort of futuristic hoverboard racing game. And so the team kind of built around him. He was an artist, he had a vision for the art, but then they brought a game designer in, and then I joined as the producer. And so you sort of, game teams often form that way. It's sometimes, I mean, certainly in all the games teams I've worked in, maybe not the bigger ones, but all the smaller ones I've worked in, they more feel like a band, like a music band than a software development project.
And is that reflective of the industry at the time? Do you think it's a little bit? Is it a bit chaotic, a bit disorganized, or is that?
It was definitely chaotic and disorganized. I mean, we had no idea what we were doing half the time. I mean, certainly that first in Trickstar when it started, I mean, all of us, I don't think any of us had shipped a game before, so we were very much making it up as we went along.
Like a lot of us today, funny
enough. I was going to say, I'm not sure entirely that it feels like it's changed, because there's still, I mean, what I love about making games is that, I mean, and that's why, and we'll come back, I'm sure we'll go around the whole gamut and come back to this, is that I went away from the coalface of game making for a while and was in a much more corporate role, but I didn't stay in that role for very long, because actually I love game making. And the reason I love it is because actually, even today, many, many years on, I still feel half the time that we're making it up as we go along, because we've got new challenges.
There's always something new. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And talking of new, one of your sort of roles and perhaps key achievements, if you don't mind me saying, within Criterion was changing that focus from a technology company to start releasing on console and produce your own intellectual property.
Yeah, that's right. So
how did the team sort of get around that? How do they cope with that?
Well, so the reason we changed, so Criterion had very early access to PlayStation 2 because of the technology, because they were helping, they were going to be helping teams get ahead on that technology. They had a Criterion in those days was owned by Canon, the camera and photocopier people, and they had and because obviously they were a Japanese company, they had a very good relationship with Sony, and David Lauke was sort of fundamental in that, in getting us really, really early technology access to the PlayStation. I think we had one of the very first PlayStation 2s certainly in the UK, if not in Europe. And so it was obvious that we should therefore be on PlayStation. I mean, it was just like such a, I mean, why wouldn't we? And we were not a company that was, and we weren't really making very good games. And so when I joined in 1997, I took over running the studio in 2000 and basically wanted to change it. And I wanted to bring in a creative director. And I brought in Alex, who was then at Acclaim and had signed Trickstar with us. And yeah, it was quite a change. And obviously, I've gone through 2 or 3 big change projects in my career, where you are in a leadership position making a change in vision and strategy, and it is really challenging. It's one of the most challenging things you can do, because people generally don't like it, complain a lot, people leave, and it feels really uncomfortable. But as a very good friend of mine, somebody I met at EA, a Canadian producer, and I remember saying to her, yeah, it's really tough right now, people are leaving. This is when I'd then taken over development of EA, which I guess we'll get to in a bit, when we joined EA. And I said, oh yeah, it's really tough, people are leaving, everyone's unhappy. She goes, oh, sounds like you're right on track then. which is how we became friends, because I was like, well, okay, tell me more about that. That sounds like an interesting reaction to what I just said.
Whether they liked it or not, you dragged them onto making these console games and self-development of original IP, which is still something which is talked about today as being crucial for a business.
Yes, I mean, ultimately it is. I mean, look, I have a huge amount of respect for people who make excellent versions of other people's IP, because that's quite hard in itself as well. But at least you've got something to guide you. Whereas I think starting with a blank sheet of paper and trying to create something that will be a real success is not something everybody can do. And I credit Alex with what we did there in terms of both Burnout and Black. I mean, literally, I think he joined the company and we were on a plane to San Diego. We were pitching a game to Midway, who at that time were based under the flight path at Miramar, the fighter pilot, where Top Gun's based, basically, where basically so you would have a fighter jet going over your head during the middle of your pitch, and you couldn't hear, and everyone had to stop the meeting and wait. It was quite entertaining. But anyway, we were there pitching a game, but it was a sort of, I don't know, mission-based car. I mean, I can't even remember what it was. It was pretty terrible anyway. And Alex said to the designer, Alex had joined the company the week before as creative director, because I'd said, I don't want to take over the studio unless I have a really strong creative director. And he basically said to the designer, what do you think of this game? He said, yeah, it's pretty rubbish. So we pitched it anyway, knowing that we were going to go back to the studio and basically start again. And Alex said, right, I've got an idea for a game, and which was basically Burnout. And there was, I think, 7 of us on the team at the time, and they were very much, the Burnout team was very much the B team, not just because it started with B, because actually it wasn't called that at the time. It wasn't called Burnout at that time. It was an Airblade, which was the successor to Trickstyle, had been signed by Sony Computer Entertainment Europe, and was very much the A team. Also started with an A, but that actually was nothing. They were very much the team. They had a publishing contract. They were established. They'd already shipped a game. And they were very much seen as the big team that we had. I mean, when I say big team, there was 9 of them, and there were 7 people on the Burnout team, and I was running both teams. And I think then I hired Siobhan Reddy, who is obviously went on to run Media Molecule, and also then Louise. What was her? She's Louise Murray now, married to Sean Murray, but she also came in as a producer. So we started to hire a few producers at that point, because we didn't have any, to be honest.
So you've got these 2 teams, and one team is making the game that is really going to establish Criterion. I think it's safe to say, isn't it, Burnout? Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, we aimed to sell 1 million copies, which was ridiculous at the time. It was like 2000, 2001. We did. Because Acclaim, we signed it with Acclaim, and every other publisher in the Western world turned us down. We literally didn't have a publisher for it, and we had pretty much a finished game. So Rod Cousins comes in again. He appears at several points of my career, and he signed it. And they didn't have actually anything else in Europe really that was big. So Rod basically said, we're going to make this a success.
Right.
And, so it was a combination of, a pretty decent game. I mean, I look back at Burnout 1 now, and it's
well, I was going to ask you, what do you think of it when you? I mean, at the time, what did you think of it?
Impossibly difficult, actually.
Right.
Impossibly difficult. I mean, we made it so hard. I mean, God, I don't know how we ever managed to test it, because obviously we did all our own testing in those days, and it was. But we'd been playing the game for so long that classic developer mistake of it's incredibly hard. I mean, just very rudimentary. I mean, you look at it now, and it's just like, to think that Burnout 1, 2, and 3 were all on the same platform. If you look at them graphically, you can that's one of the great demonstrations of how as you learn a platform, you can deliver so much more.
So let's ask about that publishing process, because this is a difficult tale then, if you've pitched it to lots of publishers and not been making too much progress. Let's assume that the majority of our audience at some point are going to want to do some pitching for their game. What are the quick and dirty tricks on that? What do they need to know?
So I think the first thing I would say, and actually I was listening to somebody talking this morning on a podcast, that if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to have a certain amount of appetite for risk. And if you don't, then what I'm about to say is going to be tough. So I mean, the one thing I would say about, and maybe because I learned it at Criterion, at the time, the risk wasn't great at Criterion because we were owned by Canon. And David Lauke and Mike King, who was my direct boss, were very supportive and allowed us to continue. I mean, we weren't expensive, though. We were a very small team, but they did allow us to continue. And despite the fact we didn't have a publishing deal. And we really believed in what we were making. I mean, we really did. And I think that if you you have to believe, because why would anyone else believe if you don't? And so that has to be real. And then I think it really just comes down to your circumstances. I mean, we didn't spend, I mean, we've never spent a huge amount of money on any of our games. Even when we got to EA, we were always kind of quite, I mean, we did spend a lot at EA, but we were relative to what EA teams spend, it wasn't a huge amount. So we've always been quite sort of frugal about how we work. We're very dedicated and we worked hard. And I think that was also, you know, I was in my, you know, I think I was 30 when I took over running Criterion. So, I mean, I was very committed to my career. So I was very focused. And I think you just, you know, like if you're starting any business, and the same things happened at Free Fields, you've just got to believe and keep going and believe that ultimately it will come good. And, you know, as we certainly Free Fields has been a stark reminder that actually it's taken a long time to get to the position where we feel like we're not going to go out of business tomorrow. You know, and we're finally there, but it's felt it's taken, you know, we've been going for a long time now. I'm trying to remember, 7 years. And I think, you know, so you've got to have a stomach for that, and not everyone does.
It's a really good point and great advice there. So thank you for that. Now, we talked about burnout and perhaps not necessarily the surprise that was involved with it, but you know, you're pretty ambitious about it. It was a success.
Yeah.
You've then got a sequel to release, and you talked about having 2 more versions on the same platform. How exciting is it to actually get involved in a big release like the following titles, or does that have its other pressures and concerns?
Yeah, I mean, we've never had a title that's so ridiculously, you know, like a Fortnite, where suddenly you're having to deal with the pressure of that, you know, that sudden like hiring a zillion, you know, customer service people, which I think we'll come on to, because that kind of is where the industry can be at the moment. But certainly so what happened is we did Burnout 1 and 2, and then Acclaim were not in a great sort of financial position. They went out of business not long afterwards. So we switched our publisher to EA, and partly because we'd started working on having done the two hoverboard games, we actually ended up working on a skateboard game with EA, which never got released. And that was a really tricky project. And in the end, we sort of pulled away and said, this isn't working. And, you know, and I think that was quite shocking, because obviously people don't generally do that with big companies like Electronic Arts. And we ended up in a conversation with them they said, look, we really want to work with you. You need to be able to work with people like if you want to be as successful as we think you do, then you need to, you know, you presumably want to work with EA. And that was our dream, you know, to work with EA. We used to go to E3, and, you know, the biggest stand would be Electronic Arts, and it would be, you know, flashing lights and wonderful, huge presentations and a massive wall of, you know, you had people's games on this massive, huge video screen. And, you know, obviously your dream as a developer at that point is to be on that screen. So of course we wanted to work with them. So we found a way to sort of repair our differences and work together on Burnout 3, which was sort of the first big game that we worked on. I remember walking in actually to E3 and seeing the game up there, and it was amazing. And I think the brilliant thing about Burnout 3 is that we had it really early. And what I mean by that is it was the third game like on, you know, the platform on PlayStation, and it was we had the game stood up pretty early, and it felt really, we knew it was good. So by the time we got to E3, we knew it was good. So then it's a pleasure, you know, it's enjoyable, because you're like, this is going to be our best game yet. We sort of enjoyed the process a bit more. I mean, it still felt the pressure, but it felt like, you know, there's nothing like believing in your game and believing in your game and it going well. Obviously you can believe in your game and it not go so well. And I've definitely had some of that too.
You've mentioned Electronic Arts. We'll come back to them in a second, actually, but I want to ask you a couple of slightly more sort of personal questions, if that's all right. You know, thinking about, you know, here you are operating in the UK. You've worked for large studios. You've grown studios from scratch. Mm-hmm. Why is the UK such a good place for games development? Or is it not a good place? I mean,
I think it's a great place. I think the weather's not so good, so that helps. You know, if you got terrible weather, then, you know, you may as well stay inside and work on your game. I think we've got quite a good sense of humor in the UK, I think. So therefore there's a lot of British games that are quite sort of got a good amount of irony in them. And we've certainly built that into our games. That's not, I think the British, I don't know what it is. I think, yeah, it's a mixture of things. I think good technology. We've got really good technologists. We've got, good artists. I think we've got all the different disciplines. We've got great audio people. And I think, a history of people making, from, kids in their bedrooms in the 80s making video games, and a feeling that you can just get on and do it. And now obviously there's so many courses and there's so many, it's ubiquitous now, so people feel like I certainly didn't grow up thinking, oh yeah, I'm working video games. I mean, God, it would not have even crossed my mind. I sort of very much moved sideways into it, whereas I think, I meet lots and lots of young people now who are very interested in that as a career and see it as a really good avenue. So I think it's partly sort of, it just happened because there were these kids who inspired other people, whether it's Darling Brothers or whoever, who basically came and did some great things, and then other people went, well, I can do that. And then also a mixture of just having the right disciplines, and then other support from industry organizations over the years is now, like Yuki, where actually there's now a huge amount, and BAFTA have got on board and really supported games and brought games in as another form of entertainment. So I think there's lots of different factors. It's not down to one thing. I think having that government and industry support, organizational support is really important, but also just having the right disciplines and the right people.
So I'm going to ask you a really awkward question then about the Russian games industry. So,
okay.
There are some amazing developers in Russia, some amazing studios, quite a lot of work for hire, a little bit of IP development, very strong on mobile, that kind of thing. But if you look at what the UK industry has been able to achieve, and the purpose of this program is to connect UK and Russian businesses to create opportunities. How can we help the Russian games industry grow, or more importantly, what can the Russian games industry do for itself? How do they grow it, build its own identity?
I mean, ultimately, it comes down to the product. People can help you all they can, but ultimately, what you need is a great game that just you look at all the games that just come out of nowhere, whether that's a Fortnite that obviously borrowed from another game, but suddenly just becomes enormous. It shows that Epic weren't thinking they weren't thinking there was going to be a game. They were very much focused on the technology, and they had game teams, but it shows you that a game can come out of nowhere. And like, we had a game last year, was it last year or 2 years ago, Fall Guys, I've forgotten now whether it was last year, which was I can only call it sort of, it's a knockout type, people in big rubber suits, fight. But it was that came out of nowhere. And I think, and it's funny and it attracted, people just kind of really got it and really got incited by it. And that, I think you just need a really good creative idea. And whether that's a big, story-led game, I think that's harder in terms of culturally to kind of cross boundaries. But I mean, there's a massive Russian gaming community, and so actually I would say just have a really big game in Russia, and eventually, if you're trying to break out, if you're trying to appeal to different people who are, just make games that you think are fun. That's what I would say. And I think that's what the UK industry has done, is made games that they enjoy. And luckily there was always a big enough gaming community in the UK. Like the UK is a big gaming market. We shouldn't forget that. For a lot of games, 50% of their or 40% of their sales can come from the UK. And so I think that has a massive impact on, therefore, being able to make games in the UK. So I think I would start by saying, I know that there's a really good audience in Russia, so make games for them, and actually by doing that you will maybe break out of.
Yeah, when I pitch the UK to overseas, I always start with, we love to play games in the UK. Yeah. It's important that you've got that culture. Absolutely. Where you love play, you love getting involved. There's been a question on a sort of related topic from Olga's asked a question here talking about this particular program that we're running here, actually, the Play UK program. And she said, is the point of this program to encourage more Russian people to go work in the UK? And the answer to that is no. Just picking up on Fiona's point, this program is actually all about bringing UK and Russian professionals and students together to work with each other and collaborate. But fundamentally, you don't have to go to the UK to work in the games industry. You have an amazing games industry yourself in Russia. And in this day and age where you can work remotely, you could still working in an overseas country and be based here. So no, this is not about going to work in the UK whatsoever. You've got a great industry. We'd love you to help grow your own domestic market. Would be a fantastic thing to do.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, exactly. I would agree with that. I think that's what you have to do, because that's, we must never lose sight of the fact that this is a creative industry. It's about creating entertainment. And so I always think it's much easier to create entertainment for people who speak the same language as you and who've had the same experiences as you. And that doesn't mean that other people in other countries won't actually like that. And the brilliant thing today is that because of things like Steam and the Epic Game Store, you can develop a game, get it out there, and can reach a worldwide market. But I would start by making a game that you make a game for yourself. That's what we've always done. We've basically always made games that we like to play. And actually, we don't really think about the audience. I know that sounds terrible. Most of the games development, we don't think about the audience. When we start to think about the audience, is because what we're trying to do is create entertainment. And if we're trying to be led by somebody else, then we're not leading ourselves. And that's where you get a sort of, I think, a sort of quite a wish-washy game that's sort of led by committee. I've seen many game developers who sort of go from one executive review to the next. If you're working in a big company like EA, you have to present your game regularly. It's quite easy to sort of lose sight of what game you're making, because what you're focusing on is what do you think of my game? And what actually most people want, certainly most executives want, they want to see a game team who believe passionately in their game and who are delivering a really good game, because they've got a really strong opinion. Most executives don't have a strong opinion about your game. They actually just want you to have a strong opinion about it. And so I think it's really important just to focus on, that's why I keep saying about make a game for yourself, make something you love, and hopefully other people will love it too.
So we're talking about that. It's been mentioned a couple of times that Criterion were acquired by Electronic Arts. We've heard that they published Burnout 3, so it makes sense there was that relationship there already. But what did you think when those conversations started about potentially acquiring Criterion? What was the immediate impact on the team?
So, I mean, I'll be really honest. I didn't think we should sell to EA. I was an employee. They sort of, it was a mixed sale of kind of selling technology and obviously games. But I think it was very much led from the technology side. My view was we were about to publish Burnout 3, and we were in a really good place. And actually, I mean, that's not to say I was unhappy about it, in the sense that once we joined, we had a really good run at EA. At the same time, it definitely changed us as a company, because it's inevitable. You can't. I remember it was Bruce McMillan and Don Matrick were kind of sort of very much the head of Electronic Arts' sort of the studio organization at the time. And I remember them saying, people will say, no, don't change. Nothing, everything will carry on as the same. And he said that it's impossible. You cannot be acquired by, at the time, the world's largest publisher and developer of games and everything just carry on as normal. It's inevitable that you will change and things will change, and it would be naive to believe anything else. And we did have, I stayed for another nine or 10 years. So, and we published some great games, but the pressure was immense at that time.
Well, shall we have a look at the pressure then? I mean, how does it manifest itself, and how do you cope with pressure? Again, it'd be useful for the audience to hear, the sort of the pressure situations. What are the tactics for getting through that?
Do you know what? It's interesting, and the thing I would say to the audience that I wish somebody had said to me is that sometimes that pressure is imagined or amplified in your own mind. So we had been acquired. We very much wanted to be the good new, employees, and we probably took on far too much, and people were happy to let us and perhaps we shouldn't. So we basically, we were acquired just as we published Burnout Free. We then published Burnout Revenge 12 months later, and 6 months after that published Black, the PlayStation 2 shooter that we made. When we were acquired, all we had of Black was a demo, a 1-level demo, and we were 65 people. And we grew to 180 within 6 months of being acquired. So as you can see, that's, there's no, I mean, we would, any culture we had was, I mean, I would say was pretty decimated because we had to split. And I've always been a small team person. I think small teams are just brilliant. They're just the best. And actually that's what, and we'll come to that in relation to free fields and how technology enables that now to be a reality and not be a weakness. But at the time, I think and I've long believed, if you look at all the studios in the world, all of them have suffered when they have gone to 2 teams. And the reason they go to 2 teams or 3 teams is that there's all these studios who are fantastic at making a game being the critical point. But the studio directors always feel like, well, we ought to, the staff don't want to work on the same type of game all the time, or, we need to make sure that we're generating enough income or whatever it is, or we need to have enough projects to keep people busy, because often at the beginning of a project, you don't want lots of people on the project. So they sort of get more and more teams. And the trouble is that what you tend to do is you take one really good team and you split it in half to make 2 teams. And now you've got 2 pretty average teams. And then they hire, and then their culture kind of gets decimated. And suddenly you're in a situation where actually it's not pretty happy anymore. And you're not making as good a game. And certainly I think that I've seen that happen in a lot of games teams in the sense. And I'm a great believer that, hey, put your eggs in one basket, watch that basket. And I think if you get it right, as so many games show, you can make as much, you can make all the money. You have to have I agree, you have to have a small number of bets. So in those early stages, there's nothing wrong with kind of having lots of little experiments going on, but sort of building enormous teams and having 2 or 3 teams running at the same time, I think is incredibly challenging. And I struggle to name a studio in the world who within one studio they have 2 or 3 successful games. It's just really hard. I mean, there are probably examples. I'm just struggling to think of one. I think Yeah,
it's true. And what you end up happening in this day and age is that you have one team leading it in one country and 5 different teams contributing to the same game in different markets, which is an equally difficult challenge, I would have thought.
Yeah, very difficult. Yeah.
One vision with 5 people having inputs, or 5 studios. It's something that often comes up when I talk to people that have worked for both small and large studios. There seems to be a point when you start to lose contact with the team a little bit because there's so many people.
Yeah.
Is there a number at which point you think, do you know what? Maybe it's the first time you see someone walking around the office that you don't recognize. Maybe that's the point. I don't know, but
yeah, or it's the point at which you can't get everyone in one room. I think we keep coming back to the fact that ultimately you're making entertainment, and if you look at most forms of entertainment, whether that's music, artistry, whether that's art, fiction, music, films, TV, the core team who actually make that entertainment tend to be quite small, and fit in a room, so I think throughout all the games we've ever made, there have always been probably 15 maximum people who actually are really the people who actually are the core of the game. And even on those big teams that I worked on, you'd have people making art assets or people making some forms of technology. There was always like probably 15 people who actually really were the core people would get in a room if we had a problem we needed to fix. Sometimes you have to pivot, either because of maybe a competitor comes out and they're doing exactly what you're doing and doing it better, and you're like, hang on, we need to get together and figure out what to do here, or you just feel like it's not going very well. I've mentioned a few times that making games is quite difficult sometimes, and that there's been hundreds of times in my career where I've literally gone into the office having a really difficult conversation about the fact the game's basically a bit shit. So and it's like, what do you do about that? And when I say a bit shit, I mean as in it's no fun at all, and not that it's just full of bugs, it's just actually not any fun. And you, at some point, you have to sort of recognize that. And teams generally are pretty much in denial most of the time, because they're very focused on the bits that they individually are doing. And so that's what I mentioned about this 15. I could probably name that 15 at Criterion. Even today there was, and it may not be exactly 15, but there's around that number, and obviously it would change from game to game. But there would be a core group of people that you would kind of go, right, in a room now, we're going to fix this.
And it's because you've got that attitude, Fiona, that you get moved to the executive team. Instead of the planning, instead of the creativity, you're there to make sure that everyone else is on track. So take us through this executive role in basically the largest games company in the world. I mean, amazing.
Well, I'd like to say it was all down to my talent. I think it was more to do with the fact that the guy who was running EA's studio in Europe when we were acquired actually really wanted to go home to Canada. So bless him.
Right place, right time. Take it.
Yeah,
surely,
exactly. I think he saw me as his ticket home. I mean, I got on with. I mean, I'd known him for a while. So when we were. It was probably, I don't know, we'd been acquired probably a year. It was after Black, so it was probably 18 months. And having, I mean, God, and we worked really stupid long hours, and because we committed to a ridiculous schedule that we should never have committed to, going back to the earlier conversation. But he said, look, I'd really like you to take over running the UK. And so I sort of, it sounded great, it sounded like, why not? So I basically took over. At the time they had a studio in Chertsey which had the Harry Potter team and two other teams basically working on other projects. One had been doing a Battlefield game, and the other one was sort of trying to get a new game going, although I think at one point they did Burnout Legends for us, so they did the PSP version of Burnout. And they also had a studio up in the north of England, which was trying to do a new game as well. And so obviously I came in sort of on the back of Burnout and Black, sort of as the kind of person who knows how to make original games, was I suppose how they saw it. But ultimately, it was a real challenge, because suddenly I went from sort of running a lot of teams and also having I wasn't running them directly, they were sort of reporting into me, and I inherited the sort of management team from that existed already in Chertsey, so I didn't get to take my own management team with me. So that was kind of a struggle, quite frankly, because suddenly you're dealing with numbers. Basically, you're dealing with having to, make a certain ridiculously high number of revenue per year, because obviously it's a big company. And I think that's the struggle when you get into that kind of role, because it is about, yes, I'm going into it thinking I want to make sure we're making really good games, and that we've got, really good teams that are happy and motivated. That was kind of my perspective. But obviously the commercial reality is that the studio has to make a certain amount of money each year, and contribute a certain amount of revenue. And that was very much the focus at the time, was top line revenue. So that means game sales. So it was a very different role to the one I was used to. And I mean, the financial side was fine. I mean, I'd had, when I was at the book publishers, I had a really good grounding. So, I've always known my way around a P&L, profit and loss sheet. And I don't have any, I had no problems with that side. I think it was more just it was just incredibly different and difficult. Primarily because I don't think I was particularly welcomed with open arms by all the people that suddenly found themselves reporting to me, because obviously we were the acquired team, and a lot of people have been there a long time.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you might have been viewed as a bit of a little bit of an outsider in that respect,
Oh,
then, with the
absolutely.
acquired
No, totally.
studio.
I
But
was. I mean, some were very welcoming, but not
mm,
everyone, and that's to be expected. So that was the second bit of my, change. I mentioned change projects. And that was the time where I think I'd said to this lady, the Canadian lady, about, people being unhappy, people being disgruntled. And I think, when you try and, because at the time, quite frankly, the UK teams weren't producing really high quality product. So, and so I was, charged by the American side of the organization who ran the company to improve the quality. That was why I was brought in. I was brought in to bring up the quality of the output, and that required quite a change. And I ultimately failed in trying to do that.
it's interesting, where do you the challenge of doing that role being quite different compared to the role that you sort of made for yourself by being the sort of the creative, the organizer, the an amazing position. But the company does produce, you talk about not producing great games, they produce the Need for Speed franchise, which is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, but that was made in Canada. So this is the problem. Sorry, I was talking about the UK development, and we then went and did a Need for Speed version at Criterion, which is when I returned back to development. But that was the first project after.
Was that Hot Pursuit?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So stepping back into the sort of the development side, then, had anything changed? Did you enjoy going back? Was it everything you wanted it to be?
I think the thing that was different is that we were suddenly, not suddenly, over time, the complexity had increased massively and the game team sizes had increased massively. So I wouldn't say I particularly, I wouldn't go, oh yes, it was just like returning home and I loved it. Because we had just come out of, I rejoined sort of running the studio and the game team just at the end of Burnout Paradise, and things were very different. So digital was becoming a massive sort of new area. The problem with sort of resale of secondhand games impacting us was becoming an issue. The need to do DLC was kind of the new sort of link to the kind of digital era. The game teams were huge, and the complexity of the platforms with, PlayStation and Xbox, those versions were so much more complicated, or PlayStation 3 in particular, was that the change from PlayStation 2 to PlayStation 3, particularly because Xbox launched first. So a lot of game teams sort of started developing for Xbox, and then it was incredibly hard to port it back to PlayStation 3. And so there was just a lot of different things going on that made it so much more complex than it had been. And suddenly, if at Burnout 3 we were 60 people, suddenly we're like, you're much more, into the hundreds, and it's suddenly just a very different ball game, really.
We're going to take a bit of a sidestep here and look at some other aspects, if that's all right, before we come back to Three Fields, which we'll come back to.
Okay.
So, I mean, you might answer this with a Three Fields entertainment question, of course, but what's the favorite game you've worked on, or why have you really enjoyed working on that particular
people always
title?
ask me that, and I find it really hard to answer because I love them all for different reasons. So Burnout 1 I love because it was like, we came out of nowhere and actually it was a success. Trickstar I even loved because it was like I was the first game I ever made. Burnout 3 I think I enjoyed. Burnout 3 and Hot Pursuit I enjoyed the most because I think on both of those I was very, very hands-on on both of those. And I felt, it was just really enjoyable. It was just an enjoyable process. Burnout 3 in terms of just like creatively they were interesting as well. So Burnout 3, we knew the game was going online, so we basically made it all about takedowns because we knew people would just make each other crash. And so running takedown and the idea of taking each other down and sort of the fighting aspect, kind of running that all the way through the game. And the same with Hot Pursuit, we made it all about auto log, which was this idea that your friends were in the middle of your game always, even when they're not online. That was really enjoyable. And then at Free Fields, I loved making dangerous golf, even though my dad calls it disastrous golf. And he's quite old now, so I don't know if he I don't know if he's just getting the game name wrong or he's being funny about the fact it was a disaster commercially. But I love making it because it was the first game where I actually made a significant amount of the content. So I actually authored half of the golf holes myself. So that was enjoyable as well.
And what about games made by other people? Is there a game out there that you think, oh, do you know what? I really would have loved to work on that game?
Do you know what? Not really. I mean, I have huge admiration for people for so many of the games that
you
are
can
out there.
say no, they're all rubbish if you want. I mean, I don't mind. I mean,
no, God, no. I mean, so for example, I'm as a consumer, I love like sort of Naughty Dog and Insomniac games, and I have huge admiration and respect for anyone who can make great platform or great story-based games. It's just never been our strength, and so actually, it's very enjoyable to do something that you can feel like how to attack, and you can do a really good job of that. So we're always very happy to stay within the driving game genre. We dabbled in first person shooter with Black, but we're quite happy to we are massive fans of Call of Duty, always have been, and have put far too much time, particularly into modern warfare, over the years. And so sometimes I go, oh, wouldn't it be nice? But actually, I'm quite happy to just be a consumer of those games rather than I mentioned Fall Guys earlier. There's something about that game that just really appeals to me, mainly because I now like games that I can play with my daughter, and I put a lot of time into Heave Ho last year, which I totally stumbled upon, I think, because of BAFTA. And there's like just fun games that I can play, and we've all got young children, so actually we've started our focus has changed slightly into wanting to make games that I mean, Burnouts, and all the other games we've made have always been very sort of child friendly, but yeah, but I wouldn't necessarily want to make any of those. I just enjoy playing them and have respect for the people who've made them and can see what fantastic jobs they've done.
Well, if we talk about the people, then, so people that have made games that you really like, is there anyone that you've traveled the world, worked for some major companies? Are there any sort of games industry people that you'd like to have met and have a beer with, or a cup of tea with?
Lots of people. I've never met Jason Rubin, actually. Never met Jason Rubin or Ted Price. I think Alex met them both at some event. Right. And I wasn't there. So I was a bit annoyed about that because I love their games. But other than that, I obviously feel very lucky that I've met lots of people.
And who's your inspiration?
Really, my father, actually, but
even though he gets the name of your game wrong, I mean,
yeah,
unbelievable.
No, I mean, look, I listen to a lot of podcasts from entrepreneurs from all industries. I'm fascinated by what it takes, and it reassures me when I hear other people talk about things that feel familiar, because ultimately the hard thing about doing what we do is showing up every day and keeping going. And I think that is the single most, I mean, when I look back at my career, I've just kept going, and like I just refuse to kind of give up. And that tenacity is hard. And you need to read, I'm a voracious consumer of other people's biographies of people who make other forms of entertainment, basically, because unfortunately there aren't that many games ones. There are a few, but there's lots in sort of film and various areas. And for the women, I mean, not that it only appeals to women, because actually Alex gave me both of these books, but like Dawn Steele, They Can Kill You But They Can't Eat You is a great book. I don't even know it's in Push. And Linda Obst, Hello, He Lied, which is Tales from the Hollywood Edge. So basically, like, I read a lot of books from people who make films and all the awful situations they go through when their film is not going to plan. And and I can relate to all of that.
Well, it's also nice to hear that other people are going through either the same thing or worse than what you're going through.
Absolutely. That's what it's all about. And reminding you that actually this is part of the process, and it's not something to get too upset about. And when actually it's like, that is just part of the process. The creative process is hard. If it was
maybe I'm doing these interviews all wrong. I'm interviewing people that have been successful and had long and successful careers. Maybe we'd learn more from just the entire disaster zones. Okay.
We've had our disasters.
Well, we'll ask you about the disasters. I've got a couple of questions I need to ask you from the audience, actually, if that's
Okay.
all right. So,
Yeah, of course.
if we look at Three Fields Entertainment, I mean, what's the head count? How many people you got there? How many people on the sort of the development creative side?
Okay, we have 7 people. And we have basically, well, the reason it's called Free Fields Entertainment is because we all kind of, that was a line for a movie about that, needing people who are multidisciplined. So actually we don't have very, very separate roles. We've all worked together. We all work Criterion. So there's 3 sort of, I suppose, programmers, but they're not just programmers. And there's Alex and I who do all the design and implementation of the content, although, as we'll talk about, a lot of that is automated. And then we have 2 artists, although they're not just artists because they also do other things.
And another question that's come through, which is present to sort of team and makeup of team, but the question says, it's from Julia, says, it seems that the game industry is for young people. What's the average age of industry employees in the UK? I mean, I don't know about you, but
I know that better than I do.
Well, I don't think it's for young people either, is it?
No, I mean, I mean, the average age at our company is quite old. I don't know if I'd want to say. I think the oldest is 50. I don't know how old he is. 55. I'm 50. 51 actually. And the youngest is 40. So I think, we're quite old. We've been doing it a long time. I think it depends where you are. I think so EA, for example, they've still got, a decent studio here in the UK. And I think they would probably have the whole gamut, everybody from people in their 50s through to people in their 20s.
Yeah, I mean, more and more, certainly when studios get larger, operating apprenticeships, programs for young people to come in, to develop those skills and see if they fit in with the company culture. So there's absolutely a place for young people. Ultimately, we're making games for all ages as well, but quite a lot in that sort of 18 to 24, 18 to 30 audience. So you need to make sure that you've got plenty of young people
absolutely
to know how to make those games that suit them. So I think that's relevant for that. And another question about game engine.
Oh yeah.
We'll get into Three Fields in a second after this one, but I mean, is there an engine that you use there? Is there an engine that you like using?
Yeah,
Is there an industry
absolutely.
standard? What's your
Well,
thoughts on
we
that?
are very pleased with Unreal. We use Unreal and have done. We started off using Unity, and the reason we switched to Unreal was purely just for the graphical performance at the time. We felt was better across more platforms. And I haven't looked at Unity recently, so I cannot, once you get onto a platform, it's, the cost of switching is quite high. So I think if you were making that decision today, obviously you'd want to have a really good look at both Unity and Unreal, both of which are, fantastic engines and have a huge number of customers. And that's what, the good thing about that is they both keep getting better. And I think you'd be nuts to make your own technology. You build on top of one of those. I think it would be my advice, just because they do so much for you.
Makes perfect sense. Let's get into Three Fields Entertainment then. It's taken us an hour to get there. Sorry. So
right.
Tell us a bit about the company and what's the sort of what's the ethos? What's the
So the ethos really is, obviously Alex and I had worked at Criterion for sort of nigh on 15 years by that point, and we just felt like we wanted to have a go at doing it on our own. And what we mean by that is we deliberately didn't take any investment from anyone. And the reason for that was, I think we know ourselves very well, which is like when we joined EA, we wanted to impress them and we wanted to do a really good job and it changes you. So we wanted to make a game where we wanted to basically be completely independent and be completely free to make our own choices, our own mistakes, if you like, in terms of and to see whether it was possible. And it was really driven by a desire to be small. We both love working with small teams. It's literally the best thing ever, because it really is like, we, as I think I mentioned before, we're more like a music band than a traditional software development team. We've all worked together for a long time. I don't do like appraisals, and I don't do like, sort of one-to-one meetings I have to do at EA where I go, are you okay? How are you? Because it's not necessary, because we're all talking all the time. And obviously, if they've got a problem, they can talk to me about it. But actually, most of the time, we're just focusing on the game. And I'm not spending all my time worrying about the people I don't need right now. Because obviously, the way that game teams generally work is you start very small. It's like a film would be, like in a film, somebody's writing the script, then it maybe gets a bit bigger. You get a director, you get a producer, and you get some of the key roles on board. And then it will go massive when you're filming, and then it will come back down to an editor and the sound editor and all those things. And games ideally would be the same way. So you start really small for as long as possible. Black was a perfect example of this, actually, if only it had been elongated. But so Black, we were like 5 people for a very, very long time, like sort of a year, 18 months, just really working on the core idea. And that's the ideal way to start a game, is just to give it time, give it space, because as soon as you start spending money, that starts putting pressure on you, because suddenly you're having to sort of basically, you're spending so much money, you're running out of time and money to be able to actually, you're going to have to put the game out. And so really that's the idea, is to start really small, go big for production of assets and get all the levels built, and whatever kind of game you're making, you probably need to build a lot of art assets. And then as you get to the end stage, you want a nice long time editing it and making it really good and taking all the things you've built and doing that. So that is kind of was the ethos of the company, is that we wanted to be able to stay small. And we felt the time was right from a number of points of view. One is the route to market is no longer controlled by the big guys. So actually anybody can publish a game, thanks to, led largely by Steam. They really led the way there in terms of making it possible. But now, Sony and Microsoft have been fantastic, and most lately Epic and Nintendo, actually, in terms of now enabling anybody really to get on that platform, as long as you've got, a decent enough game. And we're fortunate, obviously, because we've got a long history in making games, that it's probably a bit easier for us, but anyone can really publish a game now. And so we knew that the route to market was there, that we didn't have to rely on a publisher. And secondly, the technology was there, and that was the really crucial part. So the technology exists today, that it's possible for a small team, because actually, if I look back on the big teams, a lot of the people were building technology.
So just picking up on that sort of technology point, it's a fascinating thing. You call it the better way of making games.
I did that. Okay.
So I'm going to give you credit for that. I mean, the better way. It sounds great. I mean, it's also quite bold of you to say it's a better way. But what does that actually? What does it involve? You talk about sort of use of technology without giving too many secrets away. But let's assume we've got an audience of fairly small game developers out there, probably starting a small studio.
Okay, so the critical part is to have the right kind of programmers. And what I mean by that is about their attitude. So, for example, the guys that we work with, if for example, I ring up one of them and say, I'm having this problem, I need to fix something in the game, they will go, oh, well, they'll immediately think of a way of where I don't actually have to go in and do all the donkey work to fix something. They will automate it, because they're like, as soon as you come across a problem, it's about going, oh, how could I quickly solve that? It's like the equivalent of, like, if you're doing a spreadsheet, a lot of people will manually do a lot in their spreadsheets. Whereas actually, if you're really good with spreadsheets, there's so much you can automate that the majority of people don't do. And so it becomes very time consuming. And actually the vast majority of people are not very good at finding a technical solution to people. It sounds really so for example, we're in the road building business. Yeah. We make games with cars. So we need lots of road. So we have the ability now to literally just draw on the screen, and it will basically build a road network. And we've automated, essentially Alex can just draw, here, I want it to basically look like that. And then you can turn that into very quickly and easily, that becomes a road network. And similarly, things like, like I talked about the some of the other areas we've talked about, like so AI. So basically, we're always driving our roads. So what we do is we record all 7 of us, whenever we're driving around the game, it's recording it constantly and sending that information into the cloud. And that we use that information to teach the AI how to drive. Whereas it used to be that we would do that in a much more long drawn out process, that we would actually, somebody would go and consciously do that, whereas we don't consciously do that anymore. It just automatically does it behind the scenes. Similarly, we accessorize our roads very simply. So you right click on, obviously some people have had to do some work to make this happen, but the point is to take the drudgery. There's a lot of drudgery in game development. What I mean by that is repeating, like very low paid people putting things in manually into the game. Like, so on all of our previous games, somebody would go and, place the lampposts, place all the road signs, place all the barriers, place all the things in the world. We actually just use an algorithm, which we right click on the road and say, I want barriers, road signs. It will automatically know as a corner. So it will know to put corner barriers onto the corners. It will know to put a slow sign down before the corner, and it will do it on the right side of the road. Or you can tell it that we're now driving on the other side of the road. You want it to be based in somewhere where they drive on the left, and it will change it to be like that. So it's basically just automating the things that you do all the time, just automating them, which games haven't always done. And
someone's asked in the audience, does that also reduce the amount of sort of testing time that you have to do then?
Yeah, exactly. So basically what happens is, as soon as we find a problem in the game, we will then write a script to test for that. So for example, like there's no, if you want to, we're making an open world game, so you have routes through the world. So you say here, I want player to start here and I want to finish here. That will then sort of essentially create a race spline, which is where the player's meant to go. Basically, if that doesn't exist, the build won't build, so that straight away. So something fundamental like that, the build will just spit it out and say this is broken for these reasons. So we build a lot of testing, because we what we find with all our testing these days, even when we're working with a publisher, which we're now for the first time for a long time, we're actually working with a publisher again, and we find that we find fast more, like we should be a week or more ahead of any QA team because it's automated.
It sounds amazing, and it obviously works. 5 games in your first 5 years, that's pretty good going, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, some of those were essentially, if I'm being really critical, or kind of were tech demonstrations of kind of like we were funding ourselves, so we had to publish. We ran out of money, so we certainly the first 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, Lethal we basically made in 10 weeks because VR we couldn't afford to spend any more on it because the business opportunity wasn't great enough. You like, how many can I sell of a VR game? Okay, that's how much I can afford to spend on it. 10 weeks of development. So that's what we did.
I don't think that many developers are that critical of that point. They're always tweaking and tinkering, aren't they?
I think you couldn't have done anything else with VR, whereas generally we're not, because you always believe you can sell far more than than you probably will. But on something like VR, but it was a very obviously limited market at the time. This was 2016, I think. Yeah.
And I apologise. There's a question come through about a failure. I knew it would happen. It's going to happen. Could we hear about something that perhaps has been a bit of a failure and what you learned from it? I mean, let's see if there's a positive that comes out the other end. It doesn't have to be, but
no. I mean, sorry, I was dropping my laptop. Sorry, I had to move location as you know. So well, I mean, the biggest disaster in my career it would be Dangerous Golf, because I mean there were others, but that was definitely the biggest.
Was that your first release?
That was our first release as Freefield.
Okay, all right. So you've started with a failure in your new company. That's an enormous challenge. Take us through it.
Yeah. So we started the company in 2014. So it took a long time to make that first game. It took 2 years, and because obviously when you're starting out, you're whilst we all knew each other, we didn't have any technology, so we were using Unreal, but we had to learn Unreal. We'd never used that before, and it was also our first PS4 game, and an Xbox One, and so I think the problem with that was basically the reason it was a failure was, I mean, it was just a commercial disaster, and we also got annihilated at review. And I think, and that was the first time it happened. And actually it was a real wake-up call, because I think you're kind of protected at EA. You know, the PR guys do a good job of kind of protecting you from the worst of the reviews. So I think we realized within about 2 days of releasing it that we were going to be absolutely annihilated. And we got some good reviews, but we also got some terrible reviews. And I think people just were expecting something different from us, and they were expecting something better. And I think there were some fundamental issues with the game, which we fixed quite quickly, but it was too little too late. And I think I still look back at it, it's quite a fun game, but for whatever reason, you know, and being 2 years in, we had to publish it because we'd run out of money. At the same time, we'd spent a lot of money on it, and there was just no way we were going to recoup that money. I mean, actually, I think we have finally recouped it, like, you know, 5 years, because it does actually carry on selling, bizarrely. It does, you know, and that's the brilliant thing about the world we live in. What have I learned from it? I think it was, I mean, it was incredibly, it took me probably a couple of years to recover from I won't say the embarrassment, but it was definitely, I felt very personally like we had put ourselves out there, and having had a really successful career with Burnout and then with Need for Speed, it was embarrassing. It was really embarrassing that we'd done this, you know, and everyone was like, haha, you know, like that's how it felt. It felt like everyone would be laughing at us because we'd left EA, and we just basically had this game that everyone thought was rubbish. and I had been fortunate that I had never been in that position before.
Yeah.
So it was really humbling. And I think now but I remember my dad, I went back earlier about my dad, and my dad lives in Australia, and he would ring me up at odd times of the day and night with just one simple message of just don't give up. He would literally say to me, and he's such a, you know, he's always really believed in me, and he just said, don't give up. And there were times where we really nearly did, because we didn't have any money, and we either personally or professionally, because we put it all in the company. And Dad would say, just, no, don't give up, just keep going. And actually, so we made this sort of lethal game, VR game in a very short time. We put that out on PC for HTC Vive and PlayStation VR, and then we did Danger. So then we started making driving games, and we didn't even have a car that could drive, so we had to start from scratch. So we made a sort of crash type game, Danger Zone. Then we made Danger Zone 2. Danger Zone 2 wasn't very commercially successful, and so, you know, you're struggling. I mean, you're struggling. I remember the day just before we released Dangerous Driving. So eventually we got back to making driving games, and we released Dangerous Driving in 2019. And, you know, I think the day that we published it in April, and it was my daughter's birthday on May the 1st, I realized I had no money.
Oh,
and
no.
I had to do a party for her. Alex luckily came to the rescue, bless him. But it's just one of those things. You just, as I mentioned it before, not everyone has the same attitude to risk. And I think, you know, I was like, what's the worst that can happen? Ultimately, in the end, I was like, well, we just got to keep going, haven't we? And actually, you know, Dangerous Driving was a success, and we're now sort of in a much better position, and it you know, it feels much more comfortable than it did.
Have the parties got better then?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I have to ask her about that. But it's, yeah, I think, yeah, it was just really humbling. And I think, but I didn't, I kept going, I suppose. So I suppose that's good, isn't it? Because I could have.
Well, you said perseverance very early on in this interview, and you're absolutely, you know, practicing what you're preaching there. It's really interesting that the first game is the one that struggles, and that's not unusual for a games company. No, you know, they're finding their way, they're finding their feet. Who cares if you've done loads of games in the past? It doesn't count when you're doing a new thing, does it?
Well, and Alex, I remember we've always said that, is like, you're only as good as your next game. And yeah. It's really important to remember that. And I think, you know, maybe we could have worked out earlier that I don't regret not taking funding, because I think that would have given us a different set of problems. I think what I regret is probably, what do I regret? How would I don't know if I would do anything. I don't even know what I would do differently. I mean, I would probably get the game out quicker. I probably would have made, actually, I do know, I would have done less content. We've translated it into all these languages, and we made the assumption it was going to be successful. And actually, we were acting like a big company. And if we'd acted like a small company, i.e. just done it in English, got it out quicker, didn't do as many levels, like we did 100 levels, didn't need to do 100 levels, just put 20 levels out and just see if it works. And if it works, great, you can build more. If it doesn't work, move on, do something else.
Yeah, it's a really, I mean, you hear about minimum viable product. I think you need something a little bit more than that, but absolutely getting something and iterating and improving. The market allows it these days.
Absolutely.
It perhaps didn't allow it in the days of discs and what have you.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing for all these developers, all of you guys out there trying to make your first game. I think, the fact that you can do early access on Steam, for example, and other platforms increasingly, that's a great way of just seeing, or just do demos, just put a demo out, what's to lose? There's nothing to lose. So I think there's nothing like shipping, however many you show your friends, like we'd shown people Dangerous Golf and they were really complimentary about it, like people we trust. So, but of course they're going to be, there's nothing like putting your game out in the market, and only then will you know whether it's any good or not. And so the sooner you can do that, the better.
And looking forward, so thank you very much for sharing that story with us, really insightful. So thank you. Now, let's try and be a little bit more positive. What's next then for Three Fields Entertainment? What do you...
Well, we're making another driving game, which sort of started out as a sequel, and it's sort of lockdown kind of was really exciting for us. Actually, it changed the game quite significantly from a creative point of view, and was really exciting. And I'm not going to say any more than that about the creative of the game because we haven't really talked about it yet. But needless to say, basically what I will say is that in March 2020, when the UK first went into lockdown, we started off on Zoom, and all went, why are we on Zoom? Let's get in the game. And the game and the online portion of the game wasn't running at the time. Got it quickly up and running. And ever since then, we met in game. And there's nothing like meeting in your game to be able to judge, your game and to decide what you should do. And okay, we're all in the game. What should we do? And that took it in a different creative direction. And it's been really exciting. And I'm really excited about it. Yeah. And we've signed a deal with the publisher, and they are amazing and leave us to get on with what we're doing. And finally, we've always wanted, Alex and I have never, in all our 20 years, have never had just, and actually in the early days of Criterion was the first time, the only other time before we were acquired by EA, we've never had that just complete space just to make the game. And we've always envied other people who seem to get years to make their games, and we've always got a deadline. And the trouble with the deadline is you're behind before you've even begun, because the deadline tends to be set up before you've even started working out what your game is. You already know you've got to publish it by 18 months time or whatever. So so we are having a lot of fun, and we're all working from home, and actually that's worked really well because we all know each other, but we're online together all the time. And it's I know for the pandemic's been terrible for a lot of people. So I don't want to sit here and go, oh, it's been fantastic for us, but we are fortunate. We have been very fortunate, and we haven't been affected too much. I mean, many of us have had it, but we haven't been affected too badly. And creatively, it's given us the space that we've always yearned for.
Well, we have heard that the challenges for games businesses is to keep that creativity going. Because you vibe when you work with people, you bounce ideas off, and that has been one of the challenges for games businesses. But just as you found a way, the majority of them have found a way that works for them. Yeah. You sometimes have to try different things and
absolutely, exactly,
find ways that work.
Yeah, exactly. There's no one way.
A couple of questions from the audience, if that's okay. Sometimes hear that indie studios work on their own personal projects, sometimes run game jams and the like. Is that something that you do? In fact, do you ever use your own sort of personal projects independently that you then bring to the team even, maybe?
I think that's more in terms of the ideas. So, for example, one of the core ideas in the new game came from one of the programmers just trying things out, and he had an idea that was pretty innovative that he bought, and we went, well, yeah, great, let's try it. So I think that the reality is it's very hard to just come up with a whole game idea in one person. It doesn't happen that often. What does happen is individual ideas that can fit within whether that's for a mode or for, like in Dangerous Driving 1, we had this heat wave mode where if you chain your, so you have boost in the car, but if you chain it, use it all in one go and then keep using it, your top speed would start increasing. So that idea, the top speed idea, came from another one of the programmers who was doing the car handling. And he's like, well, I could make the car go faster each time. So basically so it's like the risk reward of it's getting riskier because you're going quicker, but if you can keep it going, then you get quicker and quicker, but then it's getting harder and harder to maintain it. So it tends to be individual ideas. But the great thing about a good creative team that all get on well is that people feel confident enough to throw those ideas into the pot. And sometimes they'll throw an idea and you're like, yeah, I can't quite see how it's going to work at the moment. Other times you're like, wow, yes, fantastic, let's put that in.
That's terrific. Thank you for that. It's also been a question that's sort of in parallel to that, asking around sort of creativity in games. Do you think that a lot of studios just apply it's not broken, let's not fix it? They don't come up with perhaps those new creative ideas. They're doing same old. Are you seeing any of that? Do you think that's stifling the growth of the games industry?
But I mean, there's games that come out every year, and I have huge admiration for the teams that they're on that challenge of how do we come up with something new whilst also under the basically the thing that most people here may not have experienced is that if you make a really big game like Call of Duty or Fortnite or whatever, there's so much pressure on you to continue to bring that level of revenue in that you like Call of Duty, you've got to put another game out, and actually that is the commercial realities of working for a big organization. It's one of the reasons I don't work for the big organization. But if you're going to do that and you work in a big organization, you've got to balance that, which is that so I suppose I've seen it from both sides. So yes, of course we could all be more innovative. At the same time, I understand that if you are working on a game that works and has a massive customer base, that customer base doesn't necessarily want it to be completely changed, and it can be suicide sometimes to change that. So the difficult creative thing in that point is to bring them something new, but at the same time keep all the things that people love. And I think that shouldn't be underestimated as to how hard that is creatively. It's very easy to slag off some of the big games teams, say, oh, there's no innovation, but actually what they're doing is doing maintaining quality whilst trying to bring new elements, and that's to be admired as well.
And interesting, you're now working with a publisher again. Why is it? Is it just finding the right one, or?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's not just work with any old publisher. We wouldn't just work with any old publisher. We were lucky that we found a publisher who it just worked. It gels. It's like the guy we work with. It just we work with this one guy, and it works really well. And he is just work. Sometimes you just meet some people and it just feels like the good fit. And I think we were in the market we wanted to work with a publisher because the reality is that we don't have the resources to really make a big game again unless we work with that is the area where being small doesn't work. It's like, so if you're a small a film studio, you don't then distribute the movie, you don't do all the marketing of the movie, you work with a studio to do that. And so the reality is that when we talk about staying small, we're talking about our part of making the game, but the actual sort of publishing and distribution and marketing of the game, we recognize that to get back to where we've been in terms of our impact on the industry, we still are arrogant enough to believe that we could be back, making the best driving games, in the world.
There's nothing wrong with self-confidence. That's absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, well, arrogance is the wrong word. I mean, to be honest, actually, we're not. We just that's what we'd like to be. We'd love to be, because we love doing that and we love making these games. And we've got a new game that is really different to what we've done before. And we think it, we hope people will be entertained by it. So that's why we need to work with a publisher, really, is because we're not giving ourselves a fair shot, really, unless we work with somebody else.
Well, we look forward to hearing a little bit more about that in the future. Now, when we look at the sort of the games industry and where it's heading, have you got any sort of anything you want to share with us about maybe what's exciting you about where the games industry is going?
I think we always used to be told, like, you'll be, the only limits will be your imagination because technology is so amazing. Like, I think every single platform transition, we were told that we wouldn't be limited anymore, and actually we always were. It always comes down to frame rate and what you can fit in, and particularly on games, the kind of games we make, we're so GPU and CPU limited. So ultimately there is a limit. It's not just our imaginations. And I think that, technology is the thing that we're most excited about, because it does feel like we can compete. And I think that the way the industry is going at the moment, with these big teams sort of struggling, culturally, and some of the big problems that have emerged about big teams and the reality of working in a big company, and how they some of the choices that have been made. And hey, I was in a big company, and I definitely understand why those things happen, but I'm very happy to be working in a small team, and I think that small teams will be be far more accepted going forward, because people will realize that culturally it's just so much easier, in terms of the work environment, and how you have a really good, I hate to talk about work-life balance. It's all life. It shouldn't be a work-life balance. It's like what you do for your work defines you, but it shouldn't be like a choice between that and having a life and having a family and all these things that it has been in the past. So I think I'm excited about small teams. I'm excited about technology. I'm excited about the fact that we can be on all these different platforms and have everybody playing with each other across all these different platforms. I love cross-platform. I think it's brilliant. Not having that divide, because my friends on Xbox and I'm on PlayStation, or vice versa. And I think so I'm excited about the what it means for the games. For me, it always comes back to the games and what games and how we can have fun and have fun with our friends, and that's what we're about.
That's a lovely positive note to end on. Thank you very much, Fiona. It's been
Pleasure.
amazing to hear from you today and hear the story, and you've been terrifically insightful. So thank you very much. There's been lots of questions coming from the audience as well. So thank you, audience, a truly engaged group today. Video will be made available afterwards as before, so keep an eye out for that. We have the final interview that I'm running will be at the same time next week. We're going to be talking to David Reeves, former head of Sony and Capcom. So he's got some interesting stories to share with us as well. So until next week, thank you, audience, and thank you, Fiona.
Oh, thank you.